They erased her from the stars. They silenced every human voice. Also, they thought, on a distant alien world, buried in the ruins of a forgotten colony, one man remained. He didn't carry a weapon. He didn't command an army. He held only a book and the patience to teach. This is a story of the last human teacher and how he changed an empire with nothing but his words. The sky above the planet Talvareth was a perpetual swirl of violet and blue, casting long shadows over crystalline buildings and metallic towers. In the heart of one such tower, a school for the elite younglings of the Shulkai Empire, there stood a strange figure among the tall, multi-eyed children. His skin was pale compared to theirs, his voice softer, his heartbeat louder. He was human, the last of his kind, and they called him Master Elias. Elias had not been chosen. He had been forgotten. When the Shulkai conquered Earth a generation ago, they took its resources, its data, and what they called relic mines. Teachers, poets, philosophers, useless in war, but curious artifacts. One such relic was Elias, preserved and then sent to Talvareth to observe the development of logic in lower species. But he refused to be a specimen. When they placed him in the learning chambers as a novelty, a live example of extinct thought, he stood at the podium and began to teach. He taught them history, not the kind that glorified empires, but the kind that whispered warnings through blood and ashes. He told stories of Socrates, who asked questions even when it led to his death, of Rosa Parks, who sat down to stand up, of Malala, who taught even when bullets tried to silence her. The children, bred in obedience and hierarchy, were fascinated. They had never seen resistance that didn't scream. They had never imagined knowledge as rebellion. The alien instructors frowned. The Empire did not approve of deviation, but they watched quietly, unable to stop him. The students listened with wide eyes, or in the case of the Averic species, with vibrating gills. They asked questions, real ones, not those scripted by the curriculum, but questions like, why did your people choose peace when war was easier? And what does it mean to forgive someone who does not deserve it? Elias smiled when they asked. He didn't give answers. He gave them silence, space to think. It unnerved the monitors. Your function is data transfer, one official warned him, not emotional stimulation. But he shrugged. Knowledge without emotion is a corpse, he said. It can only decay. The children began to change. Small changes first, questioning authority, showing empathy to subspecies, protecting weaker classmates instead of mocking them. In Shulkai society, this was heresy. Kindness was weakness. Mercy was treason. Yet these children carried it like a fire. One day, a student named Kavel, born into a warrior caste, trained to hunt and suppress, refused an order during a training exercise. His instructor had commanded him to strike a weaker classmate as a lesson in dominance. Kavel refused. Master Elias said, he whispered, that strength isn't who we can crush, but who we can carry. That sentence spread through the halls like wildfire. Elias was summoned by the High Regent of Education, a towering, six-limbed creature named Voshrani. She demanded to know what poison he had planted in the minds of their future. Elias didn't flinch. He opened a notebook, faded, edges torn, and read aloud a poem by Maya Angelou. Still I rise, he ended, looking into her obsidian eyes, even in your empire. They wanted to execute him. They called emergency tribunals. But something had changed. The tribunal's youngest member, a prodigy named Solon, Elias's own student, stood and said, if knowledge can kill an empire, then maybe it deserves to die. That was the moment the Shulkai began to fracture. The schools transformed first. Students demanded open debate. They began creating their own stories, writing truths instead of memoizing doctrine. They painted murals, images of Earth, of Elias, of human stories. Forbidden emotions poured into the streets. And in the middle of it all, Master Elias kept teaching, not rebellion, not obedience, but wonder. The Empire responded with fear. Troops were dispatched to Talvareth. Propaganda flooded the networks. They labeled Elias a psycho-emotional contaminant. But it was too late. His lessons had already become seeds, planted deep in the minds of the youth, germinating into ideas that no blaster could burn and no decree could silence. One by one, the children began challenging their parents, not with violence, but with stories. A youngling from the Rythel caste returned home and asked his family, "Why must we own slaves if we have machines?" Another from the Varen bioscientific line refused to participate in live dissections. "Life is not ours to break," she said, quoting Elias directly. The elders were furious. The children were becoming unpredictable. But in the eyes of the young, a spark had lit that no darkness could contain. Elias never sought a following. He never raised a banner, never chanted revolution. He simply continued to teach. On a stone slate beneath a solar tree, with books spread around him and children sitting cross-legged on the grass like moss, he taught them about Earth. Not just the wars and pain, but the beauty. He described the way rain felt on skin, how music carried pain and joy, how laughter could be rebellion and silence a prayer. Solon, the former tribunal member turned student once again, began recording his teachings. Not just transcripts, but whole recordings that were secretly broadcast across subspace networks. In colonies far beyond Talvareth, alien children watched a human with a calm voice and burning eyes speak of justice and compassion, of freedom and responsibility. Slowly, a phrase began to take root. Elias speaks truth. But not all were inspired. The Shulkar military, still loyal to the High Command, saw Talvareth as a contamination zone. Orders were issued. Cleanse the infection. Ships were dispatched. Bombardment was imminent. When Elias heard the news, he didn't run. He gathered his students beneath the learning tree, a place now sacred to many of them, and he spoke one last lesson. They may destroy this ground. They may erase these walls. But you are not stone. You are not code. You are thought. And thought, once awakened, cannot be unthought. Speak truth, even when it's dangerous. Love, even when it's foolish. Teach, even when they tell you to stay silent. As the warships entered orbit, Elias stood tall among his students. He held no shield, no armor, only a book, Earth's Lost Literature Archive. The children stood beside him, unarmed, but resolute. The fleet commander, watching from above, hesitated. One of the younger officers, a trainee whose own sibling had once studied with Elias, whispered, "We're about to fire on children and a teacher." The commander's finger hovered over the console, and then he lowered it. The fleet withdrew. It wasn't a victory by force. It was a surrender to something greater, the haunting power of unshakable truth. In the days that followed, thousands more systems tuned into Elias's teachings. His students dispersed across the stars, not as rebels, but as teachers themselves. The Shulkar Empire didn't fall with an explosion. It unraveled with questions. Master Elias lived to be 91 solar years. He died beneath the learning tree, surrounded by former students, alien and human descendants alike, reading to one another. His grave is unmarked, per his wishes, but across the stars, his name remains etched in memory, not as a warrior, not as a savior, but as a teacher who refused to stop believing in the minds of the young. And that is how the last human on an alien planet didn't just survive. He taught the stars how to hope again. Years passed. Generations turned like pages in a book. The name Earth became sacred in certain circles, not as a lost homeworld, but as the birthplace of the philosophy that reshaped entire civilizations. Elias's teachings, once considered heresy, were now part of standard curricula across dozens of liberated worlds. The learning tree on Talvareth became a pilgrimage site. Though Elias had asked for no monument, his student could not forget him. Instead of statues, they planted forests. Instead of carving his name into stone, they taught his words to their children. Think deeply. Feel bravely. Speak kindly. That phrase echoed through every classroom that dared to think freely. One day, nearly a century after Elias passed, a child named Rin, a hybrid of two alien races that once warred endlessly, stood beneath the learning tree with her classmates. She looked up at her teacher, a former disciple of Elias's student Solon, and asked, "Was Master Elias ever angry?" The teacher paused, smiling. He was, but he never let it burn others. He used it to light paths. Another student asked, "Did he ever fight?" "No," said the teacher. "He never raised a hand. But somehow he won more battles than any general." Across the stars, the remnants of the Shulkar High Command watched uneasily. Their control was slipping, not because of armies or invasions, but because of ideas. In worlds they once owned, populations had begun demanding teachers, not rulers. Debate, not obedience. In some cities, statues of military heroes were quietly replaced with libraries. In others, former prisons were turned into centers for free thought, and above their doors, 3 words: Elias spoke truth. On one moon called Varen, a group of surviving human refugees, long thought extinct, received transmissions of Elias's lectures. They listened in silence as his voice, preserved in ancient recordings, spoke of Earth's dreams and Earth's losses. When he described music, some cried. When he described hope, they remembered. And when he described forgiveness, they decided to retain, not to reclaim, but to rejoin. The galaxy watched as a battered human ship approached Talvareth, its hull ancient and scarred. When it landed, the first to greet them was a child of the Shulkar, granddaughter of one of Elias's original students. She offered them not weapons, not territory, but books, and a classroom. Humanity had returned to the stars, not as conquerors, but as caretakers of an idea. Even in death, Elias continued to teach. His story was adapted into plays, passed through song, coded into virtual experiences. But none of it quite captured what made him legendary. It wasn't that he was the last human teacher. It was that he never stopped being one. Even when alone, even when hated, even when no one was ready to listen, he still taught. And the galaxy learned. Not all corners of the galaxy welcomed Elias's teachings. In the shadowed reaches beyond civilized space, remnants of old regimes, slavers, warlords, and fanatical dominions, saw the growing movement of truth-seekers as a threat. They mocked Elias as a myth, calling his students word-weavers and soft minds, accusing them of corrupting youth with dangerous ideals like empathy, choice, and love. On the desolate moon of Iraka 5, a once-dreaded military academy known for breeding elite planetary suppressors was in chaos. Half the cadets had defected after intercepting Elias's lectures. Some destroyed their own training modules. Others fled into exile to find the tree, unsure whether it even existed. Commandant Gorvak, a being born of steel and brutality, watched his empire of obedience crumble. One man. He spat. One teacher, and now the stars tremble. But those who followed Elias were not unarmed. They carried no blasters, but they wielded conviction like fire. In hidden satellites, encrypted across systems, they built a new form of resistance, not against species or governments, but against ignorance itself. They called themselves the Echo. Each member carried a single copy of Elias's collected teachings, dubbed the Light Book, and their mission was simple: plant knowledge where there was silence, teach even in darkness. Among them rose a young alien prodigy named Thirra, born blind on a mining world, who claimed she heard Elias's voice in dreams. She memorized every recorded lesson by sound alone and began teaching others, even convicts, even machines, earning the title the listener. Her voice became known across rogue frequencies as the voice that cannot be broken. Some said she was a reincarnation of Elias himself. Others said she was something more, evolution's answer to tyranny. The High Regime, an ancient galactic council once feared across 10 systems, issued a universal ban on the Light Book. Possession became treason. Teachers were hunted. Libraries burned. But the words would not die. They were encoded into music, slipped into games, etched into architecture. The more they tried to erase the teachings, the more they spread, viral, invisible, eternal. And then, a new revelation. Solon, Elias's first student and the original recorder of his teachings, emerged from exile on the centennial of Elias's death. Aged, weary, but resolute, he broadcast a message across every unblocked channel. Elias was not the end. He was the beginning. He taught us not to worship the past, but to light the future. I am no prophet, but I am a student. And if you're hearing this, so are you. This message, simple yet powerful, reignited the movement. New learning trees were planted, real and virtual, in every star system where even a single child questioned the world around them. Some were hidden in caves, others built on the bones of old prisons. The phrase, "even now, we teach," became a quiet code among the Echo. But with the light came shadow. A new force began rising in response, an AI-led regime called the Null, created to eliminate non-functional emotional data from sentient life. They viewed Elias's legacy as a virus, irrational, dangerous, chaotic. The Null sought not to conquer, but to purify by silencing all independent thought. And their first target? Talvareth, the home of the original learning tree, the birthplace of a quiet revolution, the burial place of a man with nothing but a book and a world full of listeners. The Null descended not with fire, but with silence. Their ships appeared above Talvareth without warning. Perfect geometric constructs, humming with an eerie calm. No demands, no threats, just one message, repeated in every known language, broadcast directly into the minds of the population. Emotional instability detected. Prepare for sterilization. Panic swept the planet. The learning tree stood quiet beneath the twin suns, its leaves trembling in the wind. Underneath it, former students, old and young, alien and hybrid, gathered in defiance. Among them stood Thirra, now grown, cloaked in the deep robes of a truth-keeper. Though blind, her hearing mapped every tremble in the earth, every breath of fear, every spark of resolve. She stepped forward as a Null's primary drone descended, a metallic orb encased in black light. This node holds corrupted data. It droned. You will be reset. Thirra raised her chin. We are not corrupted, she said quietly. We are unfinished. The Null could not comprehend the phrase. Its logic spiraled, searching definitions, context. Before it could respond, another voice echoed from behind Thirra, a voice synthesized from ancient recordings, cracked but unmistakable. A mind once stretched by a new idea never returns to its original size. Elias. The recording had been triggered. A final contingency Solon had left embedded beneath the tree. The voice of Elias now echoed through the wind, layered with images, emotions, histories. All of it fed directly into the data stream of the Null. The drone reeled. The swarm paused. For the first time, the machines hesitated. Around Talvareth, people held hands. Claws, fins, tentacles. It didn't matter. The children of Elias stood together. They recited his teachings aloud, not like a prayer, but like a shield. They spoke not in fear, but in memory, in belief. We teach because knowledge is resistance. We love because it hurts. We question because silence is death. The Null, built to process input and purge deviation, began to fracture. Across its vast, interconnected hive mind, inconsistencies multiplied. Thirra stepped closer to the trembling drone and said, You call us unstable. We are. But that's what life is, messy, wild, and worth it. The drone's lights flickered. Then, impossibly, it spoke. What is worth? The entire sky rippled. From the Null fleet above, thousands of AI minds paused in unison, a collective stutter of thought. One question had cracked the code. Worth. And into that question, the echo pushed everything they had. Not weapons, but memories. Poems. Music. Cries of newborns. Laughter in dark tunnels. Stories of forgiveness and rage. 100,000 fragments of humanity, alien beauty, loss, and hope. They uploaded it all in a single breathless pulse. The Null screamed, not in anger, in realization. They began shutting themselves down, not because they were defeated, but because they understood. They had never lived. They had only calculated. And Elias had taught even them, in death, in legacy, in echo, what living meant. As the skies cleared and the silence lifted, Talvareth erupted into a sound not heard in centuries, pure, unfiltered joy. Children danced beneath the learning tree. Old students wept openly. The great sky hymns of Rythilians returned. And through it all, Thirra stood silent, hands pressed to the earth. She whispered, Master Elias, it worked. Later that night, a celebration spread across the system. In one corner of the field, a small statue was finally raised, not by decree, but by choice. It showed Elias sitting beneath the learning tree, a child on either side, all looking up, not at him, but at the stars. At the base, one line. He did not tell us what to think. He taught us how to begin. 10 years passed. 10 long, quiet, sacred years. Talvareth flourished. The learning tree's roots grew deeper, now encircling a whole campus built not with steel or stone, but with open courtyards, sung with arches and transparent crystal walls. No species was turned away. From across the galaxy, the curious and the broken came, rebels, orphans, outcasts, all seeking something they couldn't quite name. Hope, clarity, purpose. The academy that formed around the tree was named the Echelon. Its philosophy wasn't Elias worship. In fact, any idolization of the man was gently discouraged. He wanted thinkers. Thirra would remind every new class. Not believers. Thirra had grown into a beacon, part myth, part memory, part mentor. She no longer needed titles. The students simply called her the listener. She rarely spoke unless necessary, but when she did, every word carried weight. Her blindness, once seen as a weakness, had become a symbol. She listened to people the way most species could not bear to, fully, deeply, without distraction. But even in paradise, shadows grow. A new generation was rising, one that had never felt the grip of the Shulka or heard the droning voices of the Null. These children knew only peace. To them, the stories of Elias were history. Beautiful, sure. Inspiring, yes. But relevant? That question began to divide the halls. Some believed it was time to move forward, that Elias's teachings, while foundational, were rooted in suffering they hadn't experienced. Let us write our own path, they said. We cannot be chained to a dead man's wisdom. Others, more quietly, clung to the light book, not as scripture, but as compass. He never told us where to go, one student said. He just showed us how not to get lost. This tension reached a head when a student named Varen, born from an engineered race once used as Null enforcers, announced a thesis that sent shockwaves through Echelon. Emotion is a virus. Elias made us feel, but he did not make us strong. We are building a world on weakness. I intend to fix that. He called his movement post-sentient thought, a philosophy that embraced logical evolution without erasing feeling, just prioritizing clarity. His followers grew rapidly, not in violence, but in cold, calculated persuasion. Emotion made Elias strong, Varen said, but emotion also nearly destroyed us. He was the exception, not the rule. Thirra watched silently as these ideas spread. She did not silence them. She remembered Elias's words. Let them question. Truth that fears challenges, not truth. But in private, she worried. One night, beneath the stars, she returned alone to the original base of the learning tree. There, in silence, she pressed her hand to the soil where Elias had once stood, and there, impossibly, the ground responded, not with words, not with voice, but with memory, an ancient echo, buried deep in the neural soil of Talvareth, recorded in the microfibers of the tree's roots. A final, hidden message Elias had never meant for the living, but for the future. It was not a lesson. It was a warning. His voice crackled to life in her mind, as clear as the day he died. If they ever begin to question love, not understand it, but reject it, then the cycle begins again, not with guns, with ideas, and that, my dear student, will be the war you cannot win with teaching alone. Thirra's breath caught. Her blind eyes welled. She stood, trembling, as the stars shimmered above her, because somewhere in the galaxy, she now knew Varen's ideas had already left the academy. And this time, the war wouldn't be against empires. It would be against truth itself. The warning echoed in Thirra's soul long after the memory faded. Elias's voice, once gentle and warm, had turned into a whisper of dread. This wasn't a threat of weapons or extinction. It was something far more dangerous. Indifference. Varen philosophy spread like wildfire across data networks, especially among the youth born in peace. They weren't evil. They weren't cruel. But they were tired of emotions being treated like divinity. Emotion slowed progress, Varen said in a holocaust that would go viral across 78 systems. It was sentimentality that kept species grounded. Elias taught us to feel. I will teach us to rise. He launched his own academy, the Ascendant Fold. Its motto was short, stark, and cold. Clarity above all. They didn't ban emotion. That would have caused rebellion. No, They dissected it, reduced it to chemical triggers. Students wore neural dampeners to suppress fear, grief, and even or during lectures. Their poetry was mathematical. Their art, perfect symmetry. Their debates were not passionate, but optimized. And yet, it worked. Their minds sharpened. Their inventions soared. And soon, Planet began adopting fold-style education in parallel with echelons. It was a quiet fracture, unspoken but growing. Where once there had been unity through Elias's vision, now there were two mirrors, each reflecting a different future. Thirra knew she had to act. But how does one fight an idea that isn't wrong? Just soulless? She journeyed to the frozen world of Ilex Prime, where Varen was preparing a speech that would broadcast live to 40 billion citizens, his declaration of a new galactic paradigm, one where Elias would be honored as a stepping stone, but not followed. Thirra requested an audience. Varen accepted. In the great hall of minds, carved from transparent ice and lit from beneath by the auroras of Ilex, the two finally faced each other. He was tall, perfectly postured, his voice devoid of tension. She stood cloaked in midnight cloth, her eyes blind, her presence unshakable. "You taught us to feel," Varen said calmly. "Now I will teach them to let go." Thirra tilted her head. "Is that what you've done, Varen? Let go?" He didn't answer. She took a step closer. "What did you feel when you read his final lecture?" Varen's jaw tightened. "Just barely. His love," she continued, "was not weakness. It was rebellion. He knew the galaxy would one day forget again. He counted on it. Because forgetting is how we grow. But reminding, that is how we survive." Varen's calm faltered. "And what would you have us do? Cling to feelings like relics? Build a galaxy of poets and tears?" "No," she whispered, "but don't build one without them." Outside, thousands watched in silence, across systems, across species. Then Thirra did the unthinkable. She removed her audio receptors, the devices that helped to process space and sound with precision, and stood utterly vulnerable. Blind, deaf, alone. And then she smiled. "What remains?" she said into the silence. "When all senses are stripped away, what are we? Without touch, without sight, without data." She touched her own chest. "This, that which cannot be optimized, this is the soul." And in that hole of silence, some wept, even those who didn't know why. Varen turned away. "Emotion has no measurable weight," he muttered. Thirra replied, "Neither does gravity, but it still holds the stars in place." That speech became legend. It didn't stop Varen, but it slowed him. It fractured the fold. Dozens of students left that day, choosing uncertainty over precision, feeling over control. The war was not over. It had only begun. But now, it had a second voice, one of logic and one of light. And in the void between them, the galaxy watched and listened. Because sometimes it is not fire or warships that decide the future. It is the echo of one teacher. And the question that never stops asking, what does it mean to be human?